You're listening to Quorum Radio on WRMI 5850
Quorum Radio, baby. On now with Franklin Griffin, author of the book Touched by Fire. You're a former Marine, but once a Marine, always a Marine. You're somebody that has an incredible story to tell regarding November 22nd, 1963. Well, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your book, and tell us about what happened on that day in Dallas.
Well, yeah, I was working up in Dallas the day that President Kennedy was killed, and I saw Lee Harvey Oswald just seconds after he murdered Officer J.D. Tippet. And I walked up to the officer's car, stood between him and his car, and looked down at his body, and I saw the blood coming from his head, and I knew then that Officer Tippet was dead. But Lee Harvey Oswald had done walked on away and turned left, went down Patton Street over to Jefferson. And that's what I saw that day.
Sir, let me ask you a question. Tell us about why you were in Oak Cliff that day.
I was working as a bricklayer's helper at Tenth in Denver there for Smith & O'Reilly Construction Company.
Okay, right. And so where exactly was the work site?
The work site was at the corner of 10th in Denver. And, Officer Tippet was killed closer to Patton in Denver.
Right. And so at the time, how old were you when this happened, Franklin?
I was 20 and 21 years old. I'd been out of the Marine Corps just shortly, and I went to Dallas to go to work, and that's where I was working at up there that day.
Right. So then, now were you accompanied by some other workmates or what?
I was working for a company, the title was Smith & O'Reilly Construction Company. They were a bricklaying outfit company. And there was a 20-unit apartment project being built there on that corner, and I was working there as a bricklayer's helper. And that day
Right.
that I was working there, and the day that President Kennedy was killed, my bosses had left where I was working. They had went to town to get some bricks and stuff like that in mortar to do that job, and I was just sitting there by myself.
So were there any other people with you that day, or you were completely alone?
As far as I know, I was alone on the job site, but I found out later that there was another guy on the job site, and I didn't see him. Evidently, he was around back or something, because I was sitting out on the street facing 10th and Denver, about 6 feet off from the curb, sitting on the scaffolding when I heard the shots fired.
Right. So then when you heard the shots, were you facing the street, or were you facing your back to the street, or what?
No, I was facing the street. I was about 6 foot from the sidewalk. The building was real close to the sidewalk. It was a 20-unit apartment project built by a guy named Albert Walker.
Right. So let me just understand. So which street were you looking down when you heard the shots?
Denver.
Okay. So how many feet were you from Lee Harvey Oswald when it happened?
Okay, actually, let me get this straight. I was facing 10th Street, but Denver Street come right in, intersected with 10th Street. Denver intersected 10th Street was the main street. That was the street that Officer Tippet was on. And I was about 3 feet from the street on the scaffolding, because the building was built real close to the street, and the scaffolding almost touched the street.
Just curious. You live in Texas now, right? You live in the Houston area, in Splendora?
I live in Splendora, about 60 miles north of Houston.
That building that's on, what street again is the building on that you built, the 20-unit apartment building that you were working on that day?
It was 10th Street. It was Denver Street intersected with 10th Street, 10th and Denver. It was right there at the corner.
What's the name of that building, by the way? Just curious. It's not a really big building. What's the name of that building? Is it still standing today?
No, they tore that down in '93 and built a home there. The same guy that owned the apartment, 20-unit apartment building, he was the owner, Albert Walker, and he had it torn down in '93 and built a home there.
Can I ask you a question? What's the address, the exact address where that building used to be, that 20-unit apartment building that was torn down in the 90s and now is occupied, that site occupied by a home? What's the address of that home?
I don't really know. I don't know the street address for it.
Okay. So it's about how many feet from the scene of the Tippet murder? Where you were standing again?
I'd probably say 150, 200 feet at the most.
Okay. Right. And so, keep in mind, you were a young former Marine. When you were, just to give people an idea of your visual acuity in November 22nd, 1963, just prior, when you were just the last time you were in the Marines and you had to qualify with was it the M1 Garand or the M14 at that time? What was the rifle?
It was M1 Garand. Yeah, we still carried the M1 Garand back then.
Right. And so the last time you qualified, what did you qualify as? A marksman, sharpshooter, or expert?
No, I fired expert on the range. 243 out of a possible 250.
Right. So in other words, you were pretty much every time you presented yourself in the Marine Corps for rifle qualification, did you always score expert?
One time I had qualified as a marksman, but they let me re-fire the range because I complained about somebody had messed with my sights on my rifle, and
right.
So we went back out and re-qualified.
So you qualified as an expert again, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Wow. So you probably qualified. I'm going through all this because it's important for people to know that Marines, when they qualify as an expert, they're hitting, a preponderance of rounds downrange, including up to 500 yards?
500 yards. I was in the Army National Guard before I went in the Marine Corps, so I'd already qualified with the M1 Garand rifle. But in the Army, you fired at 300 yards, and you fired at the silhouettes the size of a man. In the Marine Corps, you fired at a 20-inch target, and you fired at a 500-yard range.
Right. And it's one thing, unless people say, well, this is impossible. How could it be in the Army and they go in the Marine Corps? You were in the Army for a very brief time. They let you go to the Marine Corps, didn't they? Tell us about that.
I was in the Army National Guard, and anytime you're in a National Guard, you can always get released to go active duty in any military service.
At least at that time you could. And so how many months were you in the Army?
I was in it 6 months. 6 months I had to go 8 weeks to boot camp training. Then I had to go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I trained on the 105 Houses artillery for 4 weeks, 4 months. And I went back home to Alabama where I was at. Then I got released to go in the Marine Corps, and I went right back through their boot camp.
Right. So then that way, when all this happened, you were like 21, right? When this happened in Dallas?
Yeah, yes. I was 21 when I was discharged. I was 17 when I went in.
Right. So let me ask you a question. When on a day like that, what do you remember about the weather? Anything at all? It was a long time ago, of course, almost 60 years ago. But what do you remember about the day itself?
It was a sunny day. It was kind of cool. It was actually it's kind of getting toward the end of the year, but the sun was out. And it was kind of cool, but it was a nice day.
And tell me something. When this happened, you heard how many shots that were fired by Oswald?
4 shots is what I heard.
Right. And did you see any of the shots fired? Did you see Oswald with a pistol in his hand pointing at Officer Tippet?
No, I did not see him pointing the gun at Officer Tippet. In fact, I didn't see him shoot Tippet. I seen him walking away from the officer, walking down the street, going to Patton Street, and he turned left, went over to Jefferson. And I guess that's how he got his way to the movie theater.
Right. So how many seconds did you actually see Oswald walking away? And you did see the pistol in his hand, did you not?
Yeah, he was fooling. He didn't really walk away really fast. He was messing with his pistol. I don't know if he was reloading or what he was doing. But he had his back to me walking. Yeah, he had his back to me walking up to Patton. He turned left on Patton and went over to Jefferson Street.
What do you remember about the clothes he had on when you saw him?
They were light-colored clothes. I don't remember if they were white or faded white. I don't remember all that. Did
you see his face at all at any time?
No. I didn't see his face at all until he turned left going down Patton Street. Then I saw the side view of his face. And then the next day I was at home watching television, and I saw his face again. I said, then I told Jim, the guy I was renting a room from, I said, that's the guy that killed that police officer. I recognized him. They don't know that was him. When they showed his mug face.
Right. So keep in mind, he's seeing somebody about 200 feet away and say, well, how can you see? How can you make out his face clearly? But if you're a young guy who's qualified multiple times as an expert, firing, a rifle at 500 yards, you have very good vision.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it who he was. There was no doubt about who I saw because I knew the next day I saw him on TV. and saw the side view of his face and saw him in the lineup, I knew that was him. There was no doubt in my mind about it then.
Franklin, what month or when exactly were you discharged from the Marine Corps, Franklin?
Oh, I was out of the Marine Corps probably a couple of months before I was working in Dallas.
Right. So, like, you were discharged, would you say, in like March of April of 63?
Yeah, because I went in when I was 17 years old, and I was 21 at that time.
Okay,
I don't remember.
When JFK and Tippet got killed, you were 21. Okay, great. But I mean, when you got discharged from the Marine Corps, you don't remember the month it was?
Well, I went in when I was 17, and I spent 4 years counting Army National Guard. And I was 17 years old. And in '59 is when I went in. I went in the Army National Guard when I just turned 17.
And so you spent 6 months in the Guard, and then they released you to go to the Marine Corps, the boot camp of the Marine Corps, right?
That's correct.
Right. So then you got out in maybe in the summer of 63?
It was there. It was pretty close. I got my discharge, and I ain't gonna look all that stuff up.
Where were you at when you were discharged from the Marine Corps?
My home was in Alabama, but I went back there to see the people, and then I just left and went to Dallas to go to work. I worked for another company.
No, I know that, sir, but let me ask you a question. Where was your last duty assignment in the U.S. Marine Corps? Were you in California?
Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Okay. Right. So then from there, now you told me also that at some point you were in New Orleans after you got discharged, correct?
I went home to my family, and then I left my family because I want to go back to Texas to make a home for myself. And then I did go back to visit them. Then I came through New Orleans going back to Texas, and I saw Lee Harvey Oswald staying on a street corner handing out paraphernalia.
Right.
When I went through New Orleans.
Right. And how close did you get to Lee Harvey Oswald when that happened? That was just a thing you remember just briefly.
Probably 3 feet. I just walked right by him. He was handing out paraphernalia. I believe it was stuff from Cuba. He was handing out papers about Cuba.
Right. Okay. Right. Okay, that's great. So then now people will say, well, wait a second. Franklin Griffin sees this thing happen. Here's all the news. Why didn't he go to the police? Why isn't he in the Warren Commission? What's your reply to that?
Why didn't I go?
Yes, sir.
Because my daddy was murdered in Alabama in 1954 because he was an eyewitness to the assassination of the Attorney General of Alabama. And they hired a deputy sheriff, Albert Fuller, to murder my daddy so he couldn't testify at trial. And I wasn't going to get caught up in the same situation my daddy got caught up in.
Right. So then now just bring us back, because a lot of us who are going to listen to this this interview, they were not even born, in 1963. Or maybe they were just in diapers. And then some of them were just little kids. So
I'm
tell us
77
something.
now.
So my question is, tell us what the South was like in the 1960s regarding police, crime, witnesses, and what it was.
All cities wasn't corrupt, but Phoenix City was notoriously corrupt because it was owned and operated by the profits of crime from the mobs in Phoenix City, Alabama. It was gambling casinos and everything else, and Fort Benning, Georgia was right across the river in Columbus, Georgia. And Phoenix City was probably one of the wildest cities in the South.
Right.
It was all gambling and prostitutes.
Sure. So then basically huge amounts of money. The police were on the take. They were corrupt as well, right?
And that's correct. And if they didn't like the way one of the soldiers complained or something like that, they'd kill him and throw him in the Chattahoochee River. In fact, General Patton come across over into Phoenix City and told them people over there, if one more of his soldiers was found dead in that damn river, he's going to bring his tanks across from Columbus, Georgia, and flatten that city.
Wow. Yeah.
Phoenix City was the most corrupt city. Phoenix City was the most corrupt city in the world back then.
Wow. So then you basically grew up remembering that it's very dangerous to tell the authorities what you saw when a crime was committed.
Oh, yeah. You wind up in the Chattahoochee River, man. They drop you right off one of them back bars hanging over that river. You go down that Chattahoochee River, that's the end of you.
Right, right. So then, so when did you decide to finally write this book, Touched by Fire, which is available, by the way, Franklin? It's available on Amazon. Do you have a website too, Franklin?
I had a website, but I let it go.
Okay, sure. I don't blame you. I
You
understand how that
you
works.
you can buy my book anywhere, any store, any place in the United States.
Right. So then, but sometimes if they have any difficulty finding it in a local bookstore, maybe they can get it on Amazon, I guess. So
You can even buy it from Dealey Plaza, the Kennedy Museum in Dallas. You can buy it through them.
Oh, okay. It's for sale at the 6th floor museum?
Yeah, at the Kennedy Museum in Dallas.
Right. So tell us about when you decided to finally write this book.
Well, it was whenever I saw Officer Tippet was murdered up there in Dallas, and then my daddy had been murdered because of Phoenix City, Alabama, and I thought how ironic it was that a father and son both witnessed two major political assassinations, and I had never met my dad in my life, and so that's what made me decide to write that book, because the coincidence between the father and the son, the same thing happened to both of them, and I never knew my daddy. He married another woman while he was married to my mother, and he told her if she said anything to the police about it, he would poison me and my sister. My sister's Catherine. She's a little older than me now.
So when was Touched by Fire actually written?
2008, I believe. That's when it came out.
So, and right now you're what, 77?
77, yes.
Right after this took place, this murder of Officer Tippet and the killing of President Kennedy, what did you tell us about what happened after November 22nd, 1963, when all this tumult happened? What did you do? Did you continue to work at the Brick Lane Company, or what were you doing after that?
What I did after that, 2 days after that, I left and went to California because I didn't want to be out there to be questioned. I didn't want anybody looking me up, asking me about that.
Right. So then how long were you in California?
About 3 or 4 years. I worked out there for a Carnation Company out there in Woodland, California. It's a Carnation Company. They can fruit and stuff like that.
Well, anything else you remember about that day that was special? You saw, by the way, when this crime occurred, something I neglected to ask you. Did you see any of the witnesses to the Tippet murder who were up close when it happened?
The one I saw real close, I had walked up to Tippet's car, stepped between him and his body, and I was going to see if there was anything I could do for him. And when I looked over his body and I saw the blood come from underneath his cap, I knew there wasn't nothing I could do. And I looked up in the street, and standing in the middle of the street was Helen Louise Markham. She was a waitress that worked on Main Street, and she looked straight at me, and I looked straight at her. And the Warren Commission got her testimony, and whatever she do, but she never mentioned me or anything like that. But that woman, she was terrified. She was just standing right in the middle of the street, looking straight down at me and Officer Tippet, and I was looking up at her, but I never spoke a word to her.
How long were you at the Tippet murder scene?
Probably 3 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes.
You were about how many feet away were you when you heard the shot and you saw Oswald walking away? How many feet away were you?
Probably 150, 200 at the most.
Okay, so tell us. So then, did you walk to the crime scene? Run to the crime scene?
I walked up there. I was the first one there, except for Helen Markham, who was standing in the middle of the street. And when I saw Officer Tippet laying in front of his car, I walked between the car and his body. And I turned over toward Officer Tippet and bent over with my hands on my knees, looking to see if I could see any sign of life. And I didn't see any life, but I saw the blood coming from underneath his cap, oozing down the street. And I knew then that officer was probably dead. And he had both his hands folded across his chest, and he had a silver watch on his right wrist, and his head was tilted away from his car, and you could see the blood coming from his head oozing down on the seat. I knew the officer was dead.
Did you see any other on his chest? Did you see any evidence of a gunshot or gunshots?
I didn't see it. I didn't see any gunshot holes. I didn't see the one in his head, really. I just saw the blood coming out the opposite side of his head. His head was turned away from his car toward the street, but his cap was still under his head. His hands were folded across his chest, but you could see his watch on his left hand.
Right. Well, how about his legs? What was the position of his legs?
They were straight out, just like if he was lying on a bed.
Wow. Okay. Right. And so at that time, was he ashen colored? Was he what was his color of his face?
I believe it looked unnormal because I don't think he really had time to do much changing because I got there so quickly.
And after you saw his body, were there other people starting to gather around and all?
There was one other woman that I noticed, and that was Helen Louise Markham. She was standing right in the middle of the street, looking straight toward me and Officer Tippet. I was bending over his Tippet, and I looked up, and I saw Helen Markham standing out there in the middle of the street, about 15 feet from where we were at.
Right. And so then what? How long were you there at the scene again of the crime? How many minutes or seconds were you there watching Officer
Probably
Tippet?
in reality, probably a couple of minutes.
And then what did you do?
I got back up on the sidewalk and walked down to my job site and got back up there on the scaffold and waited for the police and all the people to come around.
How long did it take until the police showed up?
Oh, it wasn't long, probably 5 minutes or so. 5 or 10 minutes.
So then when you were out there, as you were walking back, did you see like 20, 30 people gathering around the police car of Officer Tippet? Like just Helen Markham, that was it?
That was it. The people started gathering around after I was back down at my scaffolding because we were the first. Helen Markham was going to work over there. She worked there on Main Street at a restaurant. She was a waitress. She had crossed the street going to her job. She goes over to Jefferson Street where she catches a bus to go to her job. She was working at a restaurant down there. I didn't speak to her. She didn't speak to me. I just looked up and saw her.
Sure. Did you see the taxi that there's a taxi driver whose last name was Scoggins? Did you see that?
I saw a cab come by. I sure did. I saw a cab come by.
Right. Okay. All right. So you don't remember seeing nobody. So in other words, when you were, go ahead.
There was a Mexican come by in a truck. I think that's that Bendetta's guy, whoever you were talking about.
Take it at that. So thanks so much. I wanted to just clarify that one point about the position of Officer Tippet's body. So all this happened between the time that the shots rang out and you turned and saw Oswald walking away, and you looking at Officer Tippet's body and returning to your scaffolding. That was about in the space of about 5 minutes, wasn't it?
That would probably be pretty close.
Okay.
There was a black woman said she saw me. Somebody mentioned I've come across it before, and she was on the same side of the street where Officer Tippet got killed. Just real. She had to be real close to where I was at, living in one of the more white frame houses. Right. She was a black colored lady. Have you run across her?
Possibly. I think I've heard about something about a person who they claim also saw the crime or the crime scene. I'm not sure which, but I have heard of somebody like that.
The reason I mentioned that, I saw a statement that she had made, and she said she described a person like me walking down back toward the job where I was at.
Oh, really? Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, she's a big black lady. She's a big person. I think she gobbled so much she got her story all messed up.
Well,
but
could be.
She did mention a tall guy walking down the street from Tippet's car. The reason I mentioned it to you.
So then, how long did it take until the ambulance came? The police came.
I think probably 15 minutes, maybe. I went back down to my scaffolding, and there was a police officer's car coming on Denver Street, on 10th Street, where I was working, and turned left on Denver to go right there where the police officer was at. There was squad cars coming by there. And one thing I remember, it was really caught my attention. Right across the street from where I was working, as the guy came out on his porch as his police cars was coming by, and he hollered out, he said, "Ever who killed that nigger-loving son of a bitch needs to go, metal put on him." Well, cops heard what this man said. His name was Wright, I believe it was, and they went up on his porch and got him and put him in the back seat of a patrol car. I don't know what they did with him. They took him with them. They took him with them.
Wow. So,
the guy made that statement.
So to understand, so you were there like 3 minutes at the scene of the Tippet murder, and then you went back to your work site, right?
Yeah, I got up on the scaffold and just sat there and watched all the people coming and going.
And there must have been, how many police cars showed up? Would you
probably
say?
Four or five, I would say, at the minimum.
Right, and so they were there. Did you see an ambulance pull up for Officer Tippet?
The ambulance came up and stuff like that, and I didn't really get up there to where I could see everything going on. There's a lot of people walking around. I was just sitting back up there on my scaffolding.
So after that, a couple of days later, you went to California, right? And so did you have any family in Dallas at the time when the murder happened?
No. There were a couple of people that came from the Tippet's murder, where the newspaper people. There was two guys from Paris, France. They were from Paris, and they came up to my scaffold and asked me, what did I see? And I told them I didn't see anything. I really didn't know what's going on. I didn't want to talk to him.
Right. Sure. Wow. So anything else from that day, from that incident, from the murder of Officer Tippet that you remember that you could share with us?
There's not really a whole lot to say.
Right.
The only thing that really bothered me about the whole situation is why Officer Tippet did not get out of his car with his gun, because he was pulling Lee Harvey over as a suspect, because evidently they had an APB on him. It's why Officer Tippet stopped him in the first place. And I don't know why Officer Tippet didn't get out of his car, being a little bit more alert about Lee Harvey Oswald, because he fit the description of the people that came out over the radio, I'm sure, after he had killed Kennedy. They put an APB out on for him. And I never figured that one out about Officer Tippet, because he wouldn't have, I don't know why he would have stopped him if he hadn't suspected him.
Right, sure. Okay, well, that's great. Well, Franklin Griffin, author of Touched by Fire, available on Amazon. Franklin, we hope to have you on again. You have a Facebook page, don't you? What's the name of the Facebook page?
Franklin Griffin.
Franklin Griffin. Okay, that's fantastic. So we just go to Franklin Griffin, and I guess it'll say Splendora, Texas, right?
I'm not sure how that works. I know it's just Franklin Griffin on Facebook.
And you've got some documents on there, Franklin. Excuse me. You've got some. Didn't you also get a letter from Robert Oswald and from some other people?
I got a letter from Robert Oswald. I got a letter from Kenneth Starr. I got a letter endorsement from President Bush, H.W. Bush that died. I got a letter from Russia. I got all kinds of letters on there from different people.
All right. Well, that's good. So, without further ado, then, Franklin Griffin, thanks so much. The book, of course, is Touched by Fire, available on Amazon. Franklin Griffin, thanks a lot for your time on QUORUM Radio today. I do appreciate it.
Yes, and like I said before, you can also get my book at the Kennedy Museum in Dallas.
On Sixth Floor Museum. Okay. Well, that's fantastic. Franklin, thanks so much for your time today, and we look forward to talking to you again.